Guys, so I wanted to shoot a quick video that runs through what I look at in a scan, what the body scan is, and some of the metrics and the situations that arise, and explaining a bit about why you're seeing the numbers that you see. Now, first off, the in-body scan is classified as a bioelectrical impedance scan. It's the same as in a volt machine, for instance. And what it's doing is basically sending out an electric current through your body and detecting resistance from which you can make educated guesses on what is muscle, what is fat, or what is lean muscle tissue and what is fat. Now, fat doesn't conduct electricity, so it's the most accurate reading. And how this electricity is measuring the volumes is through cell volume. So like how much penetration can it get? So when you look at this scan, you get a bunch of different data on here. Some of it you're not going to be using because it's not that applicable. So what I'm going to cover here is exactly the process I go through when I look at one of these scans in working out where someone is with their physique, and then we'll go through a couple of situations that might arise as to why someone's getting a certain scan reading during a certain training phase. So just starting here from this blank scan, the first place that I'll look is body fat mass. So you can see that here if I zoom in on that. So body fat mass is 7.4 kilograms. Now I'm using Haley's as an example. Anything sub 10 kilos for a female is lean. Anything sub 10 kilos for a male generally is very, very lean. Anything sub 8 kilos for a female is really lean. So there's a lot of variation in depending on someone's height, but they're just rough figures I use. But this is the most accurate measurement. So this is the first place I go to detect whether someone's lost body fat. The next is body weight, which you can see here, 49.3. This is obviously a really good metric and something that I use alongside to verify the 3-day body weight average in the tracker. So if you see someone and they're losing weight steadily in their body weight averages on the tracker, and that's backed up by what their scan results say, then you know that's fairly consistent because you're cross-checking it across 2 different measurements. Next up is muscle mass. So muscle mass is lean muscle mass or lean tissue. It is also affected highly by water, and I'll touch on a few things about why that is when we go through the different situations in a second, but that's where I look to next. And then finally what you have is percentage body fat. So that's the ratio that fat mass reading makes up of your total body weight and your scan measurement. So I don't really go off measurements that much. If you take measurements, you're far more accurately doing a tape measurement, and it's just as invasive and it just doesn't take that long. It's just a far more accurate way. So the main metrics I'm looking at is body fat mass, weight, muscle mass to an extent, and body fat percentage to an extent, just as a general indication. Everything else on this scan is kind of irrelevant. The only big thing I'll touch on here is extracellular water. You can see will peak around someone's cycle. So if you have a scan that's clearly an outlier, so for here, Haley's gone from 49.7 to 51.2 kilos within 1 scanning week. And you can see that massive spike in extracellular water. You can reasonably assume that she's starting to hold on to more weight during menstruation or just prior to that. Now, addressing a few common things that will happen to someone when they start dieting and how that's reflected in the scan. The biggest issue I have with this body scanner is that it measures cell volume, and what that means is that the muscle cell will hold a lot of water and carbohydrates when you feed it adequately. So during the starting phase of a dieting phase, what you'll see is your body start to flush out that muscle mass through water weight. So why this is the case is because for every 1 gram of carbohydrate that enters the muscle cell, it'll take 3 grams of water with it, or 4 grams of water with it. That has a net swelling effect in the muscle cell of 4 to 5 parts, 4 to 5 grams, for instance. That's a massive, massive amount. So what you see is when someone starts to diet, they eat at a caloric deficit, they have lower circulating carbohydrates and lower amounts of carbohydrates in the muscle, their muscle mass reading will decrease. What this does to the scan is it makes the percentage body fat increase. So that's a really common way that people get, unmotivated with their training because they start to diet, they start to eat really well, eat at a deficit, and they see their muscle mass go down and their body fat go up, and they go, what am I doing wrong? So when I look at this as a coach, what I'm looking for is their body weight to also decrease, because if your body weight is to decrease, your muscle mass is to decrease and your body fat percentage is to increase, we know for sure that that's a result of you losing water weight initially, which is causing the muscle cell to essentially shrink because it's losing that 4 gram part of water. and that's distorting the scan. So you can then, I guess, give that bit of information. And if you just generally know that, then you're not as affected by it when it comes. The other big thing is the muscle mass reading. So typically what happens is as a dieting phase continues, you're starting to deplete further and further and further. Your body fat percentage might actually bottom out, and it just doesn't decrease beyond that point. And all those decreases in scale weight you see from your muscle mass. Now, the second you feed yourself a meal that's high in sodium, high in water, and high in carbohydrates, because those three things are what allows for carbohydrates to enter the muscle cell and water to be retained, is a massive spike in your muscle mass. So, for instance, when I was training really hard over Christmas, I was well over 100 kilos. I could put on 4 kilos of muscle mass overnight on this scanner. So what I do to test this is I would weigh myself on a Friday morning. Friday evening, I'd have an all-you-can-eat sushi refeed, eat all the sushi, which is obviously really high in sodium because you're having a lot of soy sauce. And then the next morning, I'd do a body scan, and I'd be 4 kilos up in muscle mass. So I'd go from about 48 to 52 kilos of muscle. So when you can distort the scan to that degree, it's really important that that doesn't become the sole measurement of your body composition, because of how easy it is to distort it. And it's going to give you either a false sense of security, or it's going to demotivate you from training and dieting. So a really important thing I want to touch on here is in terms of body composition, the main measurement I use is body weight and photos, and then the scan supports that information. So when you look at your body weight, the best way I paint this to a client is, if I'm trying to travel somewhere, if I want to go to a friend's house that's 15 minutes away, I'll always drive. If I have a car available, I'll always drive. Like, I wouldn't ride a bike if I could easily drive. Just doesn't make sense. Your body works in the exact same way. Your body doesn't do inefficient things because it's built for survival, and evolution has made it that way, that it takes the most efficient path. The only way that you would then have to ride a bike, for instance, to your friend's house, is if your car was to break down. And this is the analogy I use for burning muscle and fat. Your body in no way, shape, or form is going to start burning muscle as its predominant source of tissue for energy when you have an excess of fat, which is essentially stored energy that's highly, highly dense and easily oxidized. And then the question is, well, how much fat do you need, or how much fat occurs when you start to burn muscle? And for most males, that's when you get into single digits body fat percentages. So on this scan, that would be well under 10 kilos. I'd say under 8 kilos for males is when you're going to start to worry about muscle mass decreasing. And similar for females, anything under 9 kilos of fat mass, that's when that would start to be a concern. But for most of us training and walking around, we're not really at a risk of burning through muscle mass. So I wouldn't be too concerned if you see dips in your muscle mass reading on the body scan. Similarly with weight, if you're 45 kilos, you know that you're 10 times leaner than you are when you're 50 kilos. It's one of these common sense things. And if you have that stored amount of fat, and you know you're over that threshold, you have more than that sort of 6-7 kilos of fat mass, then you know that if you're 5 kilos lighter, just regardless of what the scan says, you're definitely leaner. So it's just one of these really important considerations you want to make, or just awareness to have when you're dieting. So I hope that helps, guys. We go through a scan every week in the check-ins. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out.